Welcome everyone to the Day 3 breakout session, Momentum Technologies, a Tool for Narrative Shift. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lisa Targonsky, and I want to introduce our session speakers, Dr. Kilan Ashad Bishop and Dr. Elissia Franklin. Dr. Kilan C. Ashad Bishop is a biomedical scientist and advocate for inclusion who's carved her niche at the intersection of science, health, and social change. She's a proud alumna of Morgan State University, where she earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology, and the University of Miami, where she earned her PhD in Cancer Biology. Kilan is currently a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Miami School of Education and Human Development and the Director of College Access for Breakthrough Miami. Her professional experience spans academic research, policy, and the nonprofit and private sectors, but her goal remains to improve the health and well-being of communities of color. Kilan is an outspoken advocate for equity and inclusion in health, science, and society, and the responsibility of science and scientists to advance positive social change. She's a regular volunteer and advisor to various K-12 and collegiate STEM programs designed to mentor, uplift, and support the next generation of scientists. In this interest, Kilan co-founded STEM Noir, a research and wellness community for Black women in STEM. This community is leveraging technology to shift the narrative of Black women in STEM and foster a global, culturally responsive fellowship to improve recruitment and retention of Black women in STEM education in the workforce. And Dr. Elissia Franklin is an analytical chemist, science communicator, and research advocate. The University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign was the start of Elissia's professional career. She graduated with honors from the Department of Chemistry with a Bachelor of Science. After that, her love for science continued at Purdue University, where she studied analytical chemistry. Her PhD research focused on lipid analysis using mass spectrometry. She's presented her work on multiple platforms, such as the Gordon Research Conference, National Organization for the Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, and American Society for Mass Spectrometry. Her work has also been published in the Journal of the American Society for Mass Spectrometry and Analytical and Bioanalytical Chemistry. Currently, Elissia is a postdoc researcher at Purdue University, where she's expanding the use of gas phase ion-ion reactions for lipid analysis using mass spectrometry. Elissia decided to continue the much-needed dialogue about the gap in the amount of research being done for and by Black women in digital, in part within the Research Her podcast. A native of the South Side of Chicago, Elissia grew up understanding that there are systemic disadvantages when you are Black and a woman. As she's matriculated in the science community, she discovered just how deep into higher education and other professional environments the disadvantages run. With her passion for science, she's not afraid to blaze a trail and represent in a field where people need people to see themselves reflected. So as a reminder, if you want to ask questions, please use those features we mentioned. And with that, I will say thank you, Kilan and Elissia, for holding this exciting session today. Go ahead and get started.
Yes, and we really encourage, thank you so much for the introduction, firstly, and thank you to Charlottesville Women in Tech for having us here today to speak with you all in this session. We really do encourage questions to be asked as they come up. If you want to hop on and ask anything and show your wonderful faces, we would really appreciate that as well. I'm gonna go ahead and add this question to the Menti. So the link that I just posted, so I'm Elissia, if you click on that link, you will be able to answer this question. But before that, we really wanted to use this as an opportunity to speak on the fact that technology is really a great tool in order to create communities. So when Kilan and I first started our PhDs, over 6+ years ago, there weren't very many affinity groups that were on the interwebs. And since then, we've seen a growth in these affinity groups, especially with COVID-19 and us being in quarantine. And really the only way of us having a community is virtually. So, Kilan will definitely get more into what STEM Noir and Wellness Wednesday is about. But what we are hoping that you get from this is if you have an idea for a community that you see could happen virtually, we really believe that you should go for it, because you may be the voice that needs to be heard in order to make your experience to normalize your experience. So with that, these are very helpful specifically for marginalized community. And we wanted to start off and get you a little bit engaged in the question that we are presenting to you all is, what do you think of when you hear, or who do you think of when you hear the term underrepresented? So you can go ahead, and it's not a trick question. We want for you all to, whatever the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that, put those into there, and what you'll see is our live Menti poll results. So as you enter your results, they should pop up. Yes, perfect. Love it. And as you see, slowly we're getting some responses in. So people of color, lost opportunity, minorities, women, love it. We love it. Thank you all for contributing to the conversation. Keep them coming.
Should I move to the next one?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. So you'll still be able to answer that first question, but we're also going to move to the next one. It should be the same link.
Yes, it should. And for this one, it's, when have you felt marginalized or underrepresented? And it should be an open-ended question. So that's something more we want for you to think of as we go through the session. You don't have to respond immediately right now, but just think about it. And if something comes to you, please just go ahead and answer it using this link. And we'll share some of those thoughts towards the end if the conversation does end up going in the direction that we intend for it to go. But we are here to answer any questions and keep the conversation such that you can use us as tools throughout this talk. So the responses aren't going to come because they're responding now. So you can. We can go to the next slide, Kilan.
Okay.
Because we're going to reapproach. We're going to come back to this one at the end.
Our major point here, as we begin to get into the content of the talk, is going to be about this narrative of underrepresentation. And underrepresentation is a factual thing that a lot of us have felt personally. But it can feel very, very contextual, space specific. Before we get there, Elissia is going to share why we named this talk Momentum.
Yeah, so just kind of going back again, when Kilan and I first started our PhDs, virtually we didn't see any like spaces online where our stories were being told. There were, when we think of it, we think of one, which is Vanguard STEM, and it was a space that was used to amplify the voices of Black women who were in STEM. However, like throughout the times, a few, Instagram, Twitter accounts were coming up that were about amplification, but still we hadn't seen a community of Black women or an affinity group for women in STEM at all. So what we found was in the past, since quarantine or since COVID-19 hit, there has been a growth in the communities for, Black in physics, Black in chem, that we feel like has been a result of like kind of having the blueprint from these other organizations that have come as a result to kind of using technology as a way of creating space for Black women. So what has traditionally been seen is if you are at a predominantly white institution or an HBCU, you see what you see, and that is all that you are familiar with. But if you don't have that sense of community at your university, you're out of luck. You won't have those experiences or you won't have those opportunities to validate your own experiences. So,
So that's to say that, your dictates a experience. So underrepresentation, even though it's this factual thing, underrepresentation means less representation than in the general population in a specific context. It can feel contextual. It can feel environmental. Environments that you are in, whether they're geographic or professional or personal, can shift narrative. So I went to a historically Black college for undergrad, and like Elissia was saying, I did not consider it a rarity to be a Black scientist or engineer, because that was a lot of what I saw. When I went to the University of Miami, that underrepresentation that we know to be true. And, really the main point that we're going to make today is that ability to build bridges that transcend your environment, whether that is your geographic space, whether that is you can move past feeling underrepresented in a context and really reach for what you need. And we've seen a lot of that earlier of various online communities in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder that are field specific. There's Black in Cancer, there's Black in Neuro, there's affinity spaces for women, Black men. So there's really been a ballooning of these communities, which I believe speaks to the number of people who feel isolated and are looking for community beyond where they currently are. And so before we get to the meat of the talk, if you will, we just wanted to share ourselves and our journeys. As for me, Lisa was so generous in her introduction and reading those long bios. So what I'll additionally share is that I had a kind of tumultuous time in grad school. And the reason that I co-founded STEM Noir last year is because it took me a long time to unpack some of the trauma that came from being a Black woman studying STEM. And I didn't find that there was that space for me to do so, for others to do so. As a matter of fact, some people never unpack that trauma. They just let it live with them for an indefinite amount of time. And so curated a community that came both personal and professional, instead of having to choose one or the other like we usually do. And then I'll let Elissia.
Yeah, and so for me, again, the intro was wonderful. So I would want to add a few things with regards to the Research Her. So I created the Research Her because at the time I wanted to really get into like wellness and become more intentional about taking care of myself. As a PhD student, it is very normal, or it's normalized to just like not care about like your mental health, and it's all about going to lab. I remember one time I spent 36 hours in lab. It was a very ridiculous thing that I had done that day, and I don't really think I recovered from that. But I remember I was in China at the time, and I was living in China, where I was like, I can't keep like putting my mental health on the back burner and like get into it eventually. So the goal of the Research Her was what I saw was there were wellness spaces, there were science spaces, but there wasn't a space that combined the two, where a lot of the wellness work that you see and all the well-being work that you see is very like woo woo, and and that's for a certain set of people. But as a scientist, I was very interested in understanding some of the research that has been done and things that were scientifically based. So for instance, if you are someone who is familiar with using like baby powder as a way of like feeling clean or something like that, you probably have kept up with the with some lawsuits related to the chemical components of baby powder. So anyways, the research her was as a way of bridging the gap between kind of like your well-being, as I focus on for women, and the science behind it. And that was how the research her came about. And by being online, I was able to get in the eyes of Kilan, and that is when she reached out to me with regards to STEM Noir, or really STEM. I saw STEM Noir online, and I was very excited when she reached out to me to be a part of it.
And right, so STEM Noir has come up multiple times. What are we? We're a research and wellness conference, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we really had to pivot to building digital community for Black women in STEM. Very niche audience, very intentional about that audience, and also very intentional about the focus of fostering, proper research careers, but also making sure that we are our best selves and that we are taken care of, which often does not happen. And so when COVID-19 halted our inaugural convening, we did programming online, and we were already doing certain work. So instead of my co-founder or myself hopping online and saying, all right, come talk to me, we decided to engage Elissia, because she was already a podcaster. She was used to crafting the questions and curating conversations. And I was so excited that she did express interest and end up being our host for our Wellness Wednesday series. And I'll let her take it from here.
Yeah, so when Kilan reached out to me with regard to Wellness Wednesday, there were so many directions that I wanted to go, and we talked about them. We didn't know whether it was going to be interview-based, and we even tried that, or if it was going to be like we have small groups, and we just had no clue which direction to go. And so the first route that we took was actually the one we stuck with, which was we pick a kind of a topic to discuss, and we ask the community questions about that particular topic, and we just see what direction the conversation goes. So typically these meetings are on a Wednesday from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Now, from 7 to 9, what we're doing is we're having these very open conversations, and we've built the community such that people are very open about their experiences, and they're sharing their raw journeys. So what typically happens though after 9 o'clock is no one's ready to get off the phone, or off the Zoom call. So we're on the phone, for hours beyond that. But what we found in that first meeting was that more this space was definitely needed. And you can go to the next one. Some of the topics that we focused on, again, we really started these in April. And since April it's grown, we've seen the same women returning to the meetings every time we have them. And one topic that came up, since it was a lot of women's first time in a space where they couldn't go to work. So you're just kind of at home. No one's expecting you to show up to lab. You aren't expected to go to work. So a common theme that first time was just, how are you experiencing this quarantine? Are you appreciating stillness and, some of the anxieties that come with just being in the house and being forced to slow down? So that was a topic that came up early on. And since then, I'm not going to go through each one of the topics because you can read them there, but we've had some things arise since then. And specifically, sometime in, early June, there was the post about George Floyd's death and the video, and we had to make an emergency meeting. And it was so appreciated that we had more than usual people show up, and people were just expressing their anger and, their feelings specifically related to their institutions, and how they responded to what had happened in the media specifically. And what we learned as professionals from the way that the women responded was that, moving forward as people who are in academia, we know that no one wants to hear these cookie cutter responses. So many of the universities who did respond, it was very like cookie cutter responses, and it was offensive to a lot of the women. So if, we were in the future to have something like that happen, what we learned from this experience is how to respond when our, country is kind of under attack. And more recently, we have been talking about the election, some of the pre-election anxiety, and then having a safe space after election, especially since we didn't get, the poll results until later on in that week. So those were some of the topics we talked about. Some things that I've learned are important as someone who's hosting a space like this is, one, flexibility is very important in these spaces. So what that looks like is, in the case where you have people who are, again, I bring up a topic, kind of ask questions about it, and you have to read the room. You have to be able to read the room. And one day what I found was that people weren't really responding to the topic. They weren't responding to the conversation. But the moment I noticed it, I said, pause, and I asked, okay, what's going on? Why aren't people responding? And someone just came out like, I'm not feeling it this week. My university did this. And a bunch of people just started coming out like, and then this happened to me and that happened to me. And I felt very honored in that moment, because it was, it showed me, one, that we had created a space where people felt safe enough to speak on their, some of their woes. And then, on top of that, it allowed for other people to feel more comfortable sharing their stories. And since we've been doing this for a while now, we've kind of been able to get some feedback from some of the women who show up. And here are some of the things that they've said here, which is, this is a part of my self-care, just seeing other Black women in STEM prosper. So yeah, that's an example of something where it's like people are coming because they really are getting a sense of healing and a sense of support in this space. And another thing, I have yet to meet a Black woman in STEM at my job, and I have to look in the mirror to see her. So in some people's cases, this is the only time that they get to see other women who look like them in their field. And it's important to my mental health to have a community of Black women who understand my experiences. So we have this community that is simply a space for people to come and say, like, I relate to you. In some cases, that's really what people are looking for when they are pursuing academic positions and positions in different fields of STEM.
One thing that I want to add, and I don't know if anyone is wondering, I'm a biomedical scientist, a cancer biologist. Elissia is a chemist. Neither one of us is a mental health professional. And so one thing that's really come up a lot in these sessions is our relationships with our therapists. A lot of Black women seeing a lot of different therapists, and, just having that professional person to look after your well-being as well. But then this is a supplement to all of that. It's not a replacement. There's no medical advice being given. It's just comfort coming from an affinity space that did not exist before. And there have been, there are other affinity spaces that have had similar conversations, and it's always this sentiment of just, I don't have to watch what I say in this space, and that there is value to that. It's affirming.
And one thing I would like to add to what Kilan has said is there have even been times where people come back after like a few weeks and say, hey, by the way, y'all, I got me a therapist since the last time we met, just because you all encouraged me to do so. And so not only is it a supplement, it's also encouraging people to get the help, the well-needed help that they that can help them in their journeys as they, you know, pursue their professional careers.
So we're going to end by revisiting the Mentimeter.
Yes.
And it actually did let you all share your responses. So I'm actually really, really good. Oh, we're so close. This hop-in screen sharing is something different. It's not like Zoom. It's not automatic. Okay, there we go. So when have you felt marginalized or underrepresented? I actually really like when I'm the only person that looks like me in a room, or when I say something I'm passionate about and people look at me as if I had 3 heads. Felt so deeply. When my boss regularly ignored me and female colleagues, but asked male colleagues their opinion. During social tech meetups, conferences, classrooms, on and off throughout most of education, marginalized as a person of color at work. So, you know, underrepresentation, like we said earlier, is this thing that is data. It's this thing that it's whether you as, you know, a population or a demographic exists at the same percentage as you do in the general population, but something so marginalized in the way that you are engaged or not engaged. I'm in a variety of settings. You are, you know, present, you feel like your voice matters or not. And so you may find that parts of your identity, when you switch spaces or when you break into new spaces that have never needed affirming before, suddenly need affirming. That can make you weak. That makes you human. And we just, our final thing that we're going to leave you with is think about all of the different complex parts of yourself that make you you. And think about what parts of that you see in the environment around you, where you live, where you work, where you play, and the parts of yourself that you don't see. And instead of downplaying those parts of yourself that, you know, people don't necessarily relate to, find those affinity spaces that will be affirming, that will be communal, that will be consistent in their support of you and their commitment to understanding you. It may be, you know, something like STEM Noir, where the focus is gender and ethnicity, race, ethnicity. Or it may be something, my example earlier, you might be a
you like
Latinx woman who likes to drink and read comics. Exactly. So just, yes, you know, sometimes you use technology to throw out the quirkiest parts of yourself and find the same community. And so our note is just to make sure that in order to thrive in your career, in order to thrive in tech or beyond tech, make sure that you have access to those spaces. You use technology to access or curate those spaces. We're happy to take question and answer at this point. We will leave our information on the screen. I have to stop sharing and reshare again. Very, very interesting, this whole thing.
And I'll go ahead and drop mine in the chat too.
There we go.
For the copy and paste aspect of it all.
Yes. So happy to take any questions if there are any, or if not, you know, connect with us on Instagram, Twitter. We both have websites, email, whatever. And thank you again to Charlottesville Women in Tech for allowing us to give this presentation.
Any questions? I was here the whole time. Any questions from folks? This was a fantastic talk. I love like the reminders. I love that everyone else has quirks too, and we can put our quirkiest selves out there. But I also really appreciated the reminder that seeking that affirmation doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. So I think I'm sure others appreciated that as well. And I want to thank everyone for attending, whether it was today or all 3 days, the summit, and for your active participation. And hopefully you're able to take something valuable from this time. And as a reminder, Charlottesville Women in Tech is an active group in the area. Please check out our website for future events or see them on the site, or ask your friends about them. We'd love to have you join us in the future. We continue to meet virtually even during the pandemic. And in fact, some of us only know each other virtually. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.